This is a brief history of the Star Wars, and the Galactic Federation, leading into the modern era including implications for modern Earth. Around 250,000 years ago an entity known as Ra arose suddenly and established an intergalactic empire in an era when there were no other sentient or intelligent races. This actually had been the result of a transtemporal migration from a point in our own distant future. This led to a new timeline that then also spurred its own competitive inverse temporal migration, resulting in an expansion of humanity and human-derived peoples both backwards and forwards in time by hundreds of millennia. One of the technologies that allows for that to be possible is artificial gravity generation and gravitationally controlled fusion, combined with life-extending technologies like the water of life, that if consumed daily allows for a person to live hundreds of thousands of years in a youthful state. Parties from the new timeline assisted a rebellion against Ra, and it turned out these actions had actually been part of balancing out Ra's takeover. People from across time moved into the past, and it had turned out Ra's physical form had been defeated already in the distant past. This led to a commensurate movement of a group of people into the past to fight Ra when his empire was only young, to spread a competitive civilization into the past as well. Both sides fought a mass intergalactic war for dominance of the universe in that era. The winner gained full control of the rest of the timeline, and control of the inception of civilization back on Earth. It became known that Earth is the cradle of intergalactic civilization, and spawns a variety of humanoid offshoots over the course of many millennia, both backwards and forwards in time. Some people from this era joined with those from the outer civilizations and fled this era when it seemed Ra had full control over intergalactic governments across the universe, and were going to openly enslave or destroy Earth's human civilization. The Metatron, who had returned from metaphysical existence to physical form, a human, emerged with strong paranormal abilities and led the resistance against Ra. They used a large city ship provided by the Asgard that was capable of faster than light space travel and had a great deal of advanced technology that is by modern Earth standards thousands of years more advanced. When they decided to flee into the past, they arrived in an era when Ra was unaware of them. They hid and spied on Ra's empire and established a secret base inside of a planet that they hollowed out using advanced anti-gravity controlled fusion reactions. They spent many years in secret building up their civilization, a fleet of ships and an army to fight with. They called their secret world Terra Nova and gave themselves the name Novans. They discovered that Ra was using some kind of energy projecting power and could return some of his minions to life from death in an artificial zombified state that made them super powerful and dangerous. The Novans learned through battle that crystals would glow blue whenever Ra's enhanced soldiers were nearby. According to beliefs from the future they left and those of Ra's followers, Ra claimed to control an afterlife and that he was God. Ra was inhabited by an energy entity that was also attempting to manipulate from outside the confines of normal space and time. The Novans also had known about psychics that revealed this, and from what they had learned was there was an afterlife that was the result of some kind of system, and the debate was over who was really in control of it and if it was inevitable that after death they would still be at Ra's mercy. Many refused to believe that Ra could be God, as he had been known as a maniacal slaver and intergalactic despot. The Novans remained hidden in seclusion in an unoccupied galaxy and built up special technology to launch a massive surprise attack against Ra's empire. These people used ships that used a form of spatial warping propulsion akin to what has been described in modern times as hyperspace. They could travel across galaxies or between galaxies in only a few weeks. Because Ra had been unaware of their arrival and the Novans had used stealth technology to observe the enemy, they waited until they were ready and launched attacks on several galaxies concurrently. They used fleets of large wedge-shaped carriers that operated from massive city-sized vessels they referred to as motherships. These motherships were made from large saucers as main bodies with a long forked chevron extending from the front. The enemy also made use of large interstellar craft that operated from massive carrier command and control ships that could move from galaxy to galaxy. The Novans made use of armored troopers that had advanced armor suits that contained their own fusion reactors with anti-gravity drives so they could fly, remain shielded, and project powerful energy beams as weapons. These suits resembled what is known as the Iron Man suit in modern popular culture, except they were all white with a black underlayer. Their leader, L, used a silver armor set in the beginning, then moved to all gold armor. His helmet resembled the ancient Corinthian-style Greek helmet. They made use of fighter craft that were called fireflies, that were small plain silver spheres capable of carrying one pilot that could fire a powerful energy weapon and had a special means to render itself invisible, or project a powerful energy shield around itself. When going into combat, unless cloaked, the firefly sphere would glow like a yellow orb. Fleets of them by the thousands would fly into combat in conjunction with their carrier ships. Eventually they built technology like large spatial jump gates, which were artificial wormhole generators that could route whole ships from one galaxy to another instantly, as long as it connected to another artificial wormhole gateway on the other end. In order to keep their home world hidden, they built a jump gate from there inside the inner space to another galaxy and launched all of their operations from there. The home jump gate connected to the airspace inside their hollow planet so that they could build and operate with total protection and subterfuge relative to the outside. L, the returned Metatron, was a very powerful being and genetically superior. Specially designed from outside linear space-time, when he was sustained by the water of life, he had extremely powerful telekinesis, could heal others through physical contact, and fly using only telekinesis. He was also a very powerful psychic with foreknowledge of future events that allowed him to maintain the initiative in the Time War. This allowed him to quickly take charge within the resistance against Ra and help guide them in their fight. L, like a few others, had special pineal glands that, when in perfect condition as only possible from the water of life, it allowed for them to project powerful subspace fields to produce telekinesis. L also then knew how to conjure a great deal of advanced technology that gave his side a definitive advantage in the now unfolding Star Wars. Ra's forces used their own styles of gold and lead armors modern people would recognize as in an ancient Egyptian style, as well as drones, fighters and ships of various shapes. Ultimately, Ra's planets were typically controlled by complexes that centered around pyramids that housed Ra's ruling class that oversaw their slave mining operations and colonial expansion. L and the Novans decided to make use of more traditional fortresses like ziggurats, and typically built their own fortresses to replace the ones they destroyed. Millennia passed and the war spread across dozens of galaxies. The Novans had thwarted many attempts by Ra to build his own jump gate system in attempts to launch counter-offensives, and had attempted several times to find the location of Terra Nova with the hope of being able to jump a fleet right to it and destroy it in one fell swoop. Ra's forces managed to destroy the Novans' first jump gate, called the Lion's Gate, that was the only gate that could connect to Terra Nova, in a failed attempt to reach the world and destroy it. The Novans also discovered a secret enemy jump gate construction effort and destroyed it in return. Millennia passed as Ra's territory continued to shrink and the Novans had expanded to form their own large intergalactic realm. They formed what they called the Celestial Federation and referred to themselves as the Celestials. After approximately 10,000 years of wars that moved from galaxy to galaxy, the Celestials finally arrived back at the Milky Way and the front lines reached Earth. Both sides put all of their efforts into securing Earth, and the focal point of the war revolved around Earth and this galaxy for many years. It was during those first battles that when the Celestials arrived and attacked Ra's forces holding Earth that they used the same technique as with their hidden home world to hollow out the Earth and re-engineer the inside to form an artificial microstar where the molten core was, and create a cavity to form an inner surface that could be terraformed. During the first assault to capture Earth from Ra's forces, L's golden armor suit became notoriously damaged, scraping off the gold coating to his right leg, leaving him with one silver leg. This became his trademark appearance ever after. While L's fleet engaged Ra's defense fleet in orbit of Earth, L led a strike force that gained the assistance of local pre-humans to help overthrow Ra's main pyramid complex that he had used to enslave our own ancestors. That complex was destroyed when Ra's planetary shield was brought down by L and they laid waste to an area that is now at the heart of the Sahara Desert. After the planet was captured, L's forces erected their own planetary shield and awaited reinforcements which often arrived in waves that were weeks apart that had to cross the open gap between galaxies. That is also when L, the leader of the Celestials since they came from the future, used the same type of technology to create a fused mass that became Earth's moon. Up to that point Earth still had no moon. This was part of their effort to fortify their position and fulfilled what they knew was part of a causality loop in time, whereas they had come from an era where Earth already had the moon present. The moon was not only to serve as another land mass nearby, but through the artificial fusion process the materials the moon was designed to return as formed a crystal core that allowed it to be stimulated to cause emissions of energy. The moon itself was a base core for a massive energy weapon. These laser moons could also be designed to contain plasma cores for the same purpose, which would not remain active for as long. Once the new inner surface of Earth was completed, they built a new jump gate inside the hollow space and began bringing in reinforcements from other galaxies. For some time while they constructed the gate, both sides continued fighting within Earth's solar system at planets like Mars, Saturn, and many of the small planetoids between planets. They named the inner world Agartha. That is when, in response to L placing a moon in orbit of Earth, Ra placed his own laser moon in orbit of Saturn. This resulted in L attacking Ra's forces that were holding at Saturn in a last assault to destroy his laser moon, which shattered when the Celestials flew one of their first few motherships called the Celestia into the moon at faster than light speed. The impact shattered the crystal moon and the fragments later spread out to become Saturn's rings. At that time, although this fact became obscure over time, Ra escaped the moon before it was destroyed and fled with his last city ship Atlantis into Saturn and used his shield to barricade himself down near the core of Saturn deep within its atmosphere. Being unable to simply destroy the planet, the Celestials guarded the area but never could locate Ra. After that, Ra's forces began to crumble and in only a few years the last of his old empire was destroyed. Once the Celestials had expanded to take control of the last of Ra's galaxies, they formed the Galactic Federation of Light, and began to expand outwards to colonize many worlds in many galaxies. Over time these people mildly enhanced themselves, becoming larger, taller, more refined in physical appearance and performance. They had the technology to expand their lifespans by thousands of times. It began an era of peace across the universe. It was then that L laid the edifice known as the Face on Mars near Cydonia, which commemorated one of the last battles against Ra's forces at a large pyramid city he once had there. During that battle L used asteroids to siege Ra's planetary shield, and it resulted in the permanent placement of Mars' two asteroid moons Phobos and Deimos. L, still concerned with the disappearance of Ra, decided to leave that era with his capital city ship Elysium and move forward through time. He left behind the Galactic Federation of that era and skipped ahead by dozens of millennia. When he arrived, he found that Ra had already emerged about 30,000 years before his own return, and had returned to take over Earth. Ra had emerged in L's absence and in a time long after the Galactic Federation believed there was any remaining threat. Until then, a people similar to the Pleiadians called the Agarthans had lived on Earth, ever since the end of the founding wars. They lived both on the outside and inside of Earth, as its inner surface of Agartha and its jump gate were still there after over 150,000 years. They had built many stone edifices that had served as teleportation devices that could send users to anywhere in their connected network, around the planet, or to others. Ra's side had never mastered that technology. Ra landed and forced the Agarthans back into the inner surface, and they shielded themselves from Ra as he then made many attempts to get inside Agartha to gain control of their technology and the Agarthan jump gate. A standoff resulted that lasted for 30,000 years. Once L returned and learned about what happened, he joined the Agarthans. Those who had remained had begun to call themselves the Asgard, as only few had remained to guard Earth and Agartha from Ra, as the rest had used the jump gate to return to their home world. L then received help from the Asgard to get inside Ra's planetary shield and destroyed Atlantis. Atlantis had been Ra's last mothership that he had used as the capital of his new empire on Earth. During that time, the Galactic Federation had decided to hold back and had been effectively neutralized by Ra sympathizers within their government. Ra worship, and belief that Ra was God had begun to respread across the universe, and people became split. They had forbid the Federation from being used to fight Ra and forbid the Asgard from fighting him. The Asgard had in turn, against the will of the Galactic Federation, taken in humans of many races and kept them safe in controlled populations in Agartha while they endured Ra's occupation on the surface. Ra threatened the Agarthans and claimed all of the peoples of Earth as his subjects and forbid taking certain people. Ra then built several cities across several continents which revolved around pyramids that served as command centers for slave mining operations. That is when the pyramids at Giza, Bosnia, several in Asia and South America were built. After El returned, before asserting open control over the Galactic Federation again, he destroyed the last of Ra's advanced technology from Atlantis and finally forced him into hiding again. For 5,000 years Ra had escaped to Mars using some of the old Asgard transportation stones that had been built there for their use after the Star Wars by the Asgard. He had taken over one of his old bases on Mars that was left over from the Star Wars when he occupied the planet the first time. There was a pyramid complex there that had been assaulted during the final battles of the Star Wars that had an underground complex Ra knew about called Cydonia. After 5,000 years of hiding, El found out about Ra's presence at Cydonia, and took his own capital city ship Elysium and attacked the base. It was destroyed and Ra fled back to Earth, now with no more places to hide. But after that the Galactic Federation, that assumed the attack was done by the Asgard, threatened to attack the Asgard if they took any more actions against Ra. El knew Ra was now hiding among his slave colonies on Earth, with no more means to escape the planet. So El then returned to Earth again in secret and instead placed several civilizations on the surface with many of his people and the people the Asgard had taken in 30,000 years earlier. They built up a kingdom that raised an army of the Arrow with El's help, who led them as Adamu himself, and marched on Egypt in a final ground battle with Ra and finally cornered him and destroyed Ra at Giza. However, Ra's spirit energy force continued to pose a threat in the years after. It was then that they built the Sphinx, which was originally a full lion, to honor Adamu and their victory. The next 6,000 years has been a proxy war and controlled inception of the first incantation of the human race. Our natural development having been altered, the end of this era leads back to the start of the situation. During that time, Ra's host Akhenaten and El's lost son Cain conspired on the surface to bring about Ra's return and manipulated the events of society many times, culminating in the Second World War. Akhenaten had been trapped in a tomb for over 3 millennia but had some technology that kept him alive. He had been bred by the Atlantean descendants to serve as a host for Ra's spirit but was trapped after only 17 years of ruling by a slave uprising that planned a trap built into the tomb's construction. The Nazis had been helped by Akhenaten, who had been freed in 1922 and joined with Cain and Hitler with the help of the Greys to try to take over the world. The Federation forces under El's direct control maintained a quarantine of Earth and made sure no overt attack or intervention came from Ra's forces. El, on the other hand, had been behind building many civilizations across the planet and had also been known as Anu, Anarchy, Enki, Enlil, Zeus, or later as Jupiter. During Ra's reign he had been approached by a race of people that had broken away from normal galactic civilization to embrace extreme transhumanism, which became known as the Greys, who had established themselves in the Zeta Reticuli system. They offered their assistance to Ra in return for a promise of reward in gaining human slaves and being allowed to regain the ability to enter the afterlife Ra supposedly controlled. Over the last several centuries, the Asgard, El's forces, and those helping within human society have been maintaining communication via the crop formation system, which has been a method of non-overt communication that was tolerated by Ra and his sympathizers within the Galactic Federation. In 1561 the Federation attempted to intervene as they discovered Cain on the surface with advanced technology that was forbidden. They blamed the Asgard and ordered the town Cain was hiding in to be destroyed. The Asgard and El responded and counter-attacked the assault. The event was seen by the townfolk of Nuremberg. After this, L traveled to the capital of the Federation and reasserted control over the galactic government. He then took his ship to the planet Jupiter and created a calm area to set the city within that we now know as the Eye of Jupiter. Both L and Ra sides operated programs within Western governments after the Second World War, and Ra side assisted the Eastern Bloc on several occasions. Akhenaten attempted to establish another presence on Mars using a recovered transportation stone that still connected to Mars. They had a base built beneath LAX that was briefly connected to it, but it was discovered and destroyed in 1999 by L's forces. That revealed a plan by them that masked as Y2K but was an attempt to take over the world's computers. Learning of the plan after discovering and destroying the base, L offset their efforts and neutralized the programming. Ra's secret programs and space forces were lost, but Ra's forces responded by launching the 9/11 attacks and secretly taking over the US government. This is where the timeline takes another turn, and it turned out there was another layer of time outside of the entire situation. After Ra's sympathetic forces and the transhumanist Greys that were working for him were defeated in this era, they built a ship on Earth in secret beneath the city of Manhattan after the 9/11 attacks and used it to escape again into the distant past. They were assisted by various non-human races that had sprouted up over the last 200,000 years in the wake of the Star Wars, who had sided with Ra. Many had been created by contact and contamination by the Galactic Federation's presence on their planets out of necessity during the wars, or by Ra's, who would genetically modify indigenous life forms to use as soldiers or slaves. Many Ra sympathizers led by Akhenaten and non-human races formed a colony ship and made a jump backwards again into the distant past. L detected them in their attempt and erected a massive subspatial field around Earth to protect himself from any changes to the timeline. They then initiated their own jump, and L once again took Elysium into the past. This upheld the timeline. This time they jumped back approximately 4 million years. It was from there that yet again both sides spanned out and expanded to attempt to form an intergalactic empire. The Federation managed to get control of Earth's solar system first, which was different. There was a fifth small rocky planet between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter that was habitable like Earth, and Mars was also still alive, albeit much more mature and aged than Earth. The Federation made its capital on the fifth planet for some time. Eventually the planet was destroyed during the wars, and it caused the first Martian cataclysm, and also debris impacts greatly affected Earth. Earth's surface was ruined, but they used a special form of technology to restore the planet's life that could be referred to as the Genesis Wave technology, similar to that portrayed within the Star Trek franchise. Eventually the Galactic Federation in that era asserted dominance over Ra and Akhenaten and his alliance, and they established contact with the future. That era essentially allowed itself to run its course, and the last of those people eventually migrated to the distant future. Those that remained had operated in secret and were present during the first events that led to Ra's original arrival at around 250,000 BC. Little signs of those civilizations remain, but it is now known that many large stone edifices in Eurasia and Asia were left behind from that era. By 1 million BC few remained in that time period and had either died off or returned to the future. At this time Earth is monitored by the Galactic Federation, who has had to intervene many times to compensate for paranormal damage caused to our timeline and our civilizational development. There are still forces operating on Earth that are operating at the behest of non-human intelligences and anti-human forces such as Ra and various incantations of the Greys and other non-human races, some that originate from other time periods and others from outside of our time continuum entirely. Technically our society leads to a future period where the human civilizations that come from Earth will result in a movement backwards in time by Ra and his forces. Those events now complete a causality loop in time that has already unfolded. After that point the Federation of that era continues on normally. By that point, approximately 30,000 years from now, people will have unlocked energy projection technology and matter energy transmutation technology that make them immortal. From that point L spreads that power to every inhabited galaxy. It was from that era that the oldest incantation of El revealed that there was an afterlife system that Ra had hijacked and attempted to dominate to try to make himself God. But El revealed that he decoded a system left behind by an ancient incantation of himself that allowed him to regain immortality and prevent people from dying at all, thus negating Ra's hold on his claim. Ra has now been destroyed by those who remained with him by choice, and the Galactic Federation has Earth under a temporal quarantine until a formal disclosure can be carried out. More information will be released when it becomes appropriate. This has been a brief history of the Star Wars and the Galactic Federation. Thank you.